Hello. Okay, so one thing that comes up in high school history class from time to time is the question about how brilliant a strategist Hitler was. Now, of course, the disclaimer always given, he was a nutcase, he did try to take over the world, etc., etc., which, I am not going to try to defend him in any way. But at the same time, some history teachers will step up and say, look how quickly he took over Europe, or most of Europe, and therefore he was probably some sort of brilliant strategist. And other teachers will stand up and say, no, he wasn't. And I'm going to lean towards that second part, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So one thing we have to consider: World War One ends. It's the war to end all war, supposedly. It wasn't, but that's the title people started giving it. And largely, people just didn't want war anymore, especially in Europe. They saw how destructive it could be. Ends up not being nearly as destructive as World War II was, but still, no one wanted it. So, again, back to the history classes. Hitler decides to annex Austria and Czechoslovakia and other parts of Southeast Europe. And everyone turns a blind eye to it. Not because, oh, this is a good thing, or not because they don't care. It's more or less they are sick and tired of war. You know, even though it's been about 20 years, close to 20 years since World War One ended, many world leaders served in World War One. Most people still remember it, or many people who were alive during World War One are alive during the beginning of World War Two, so they remember it. And so it's not military genius which allowed him to annex these countries. It's more along the lines of, we don't want war anymore. That's part of it. That's not all of it. It's part of it, though. Um, we always learn in history class, he used the excuse, well, these are German speaking regions during the Treaty of Verdun and the other treaties that ended World War One. Language was one of the things, language is a large part of culture, and they didn't want to split up European culture at the end of World War One. So we use that as an excuse. These are German speaking people, they are part of Germany, they should be a part of Germany. Um, Even though, in order to really make a link between these countries and Germany, you had to go back probably 100 years or more before World War II or World War One or either one. I mean, they were quote unquote Germanic people, but they had formed their own countries years ago. They weren't. There wasn't one big unified Germany that was made up of all of the Germanic people. The Franks were Germanic people, so the French were actually part German, if you want to go that argument. So, classifying someone as Germanic isn't necessarily a good reason to invade them and say they should be a part of us, but the rest of the world didn't want war. So the more amazing part here is that he rearmed Germany when Germany wasn't supposed to be armed. And that took some doing. But even then, no one was really policing them. It wasn't, you're not supposed to have weapons and we're going to have inspectors come in every so often to make sure you don't get weapons. It was more a matter of no one policed them. And so he did do a lot under the table, we're going to build this factory to make cars, and in reality, half of what they're making is tank parts. Same with guns, same with, all weapons basically. Most of them were made in factories which were supposed to be making other stuff. At the same time, some people have speculated, yeah, the rest of the world really knew what was going on. They just didn't want to step in and say anything about it. Because again, no one was looking for another fight after World War One. So there's his, great brilliance of expansion. He made some alliances. The alliance with Japan was pretty good. Again, if you study World War One history, most of what we read about in school, we look at what was going on in Europe. Of course, the Ottoman Empire was part of World War One, so it was spreading stuff into the Middle East. And Germany did have colonies along the eastern coast of Africa and also in the Pacific, in the South Pacific. So while there wasn't a lot of fighting going on there was the worry of, can he invade Malaysia? Can he invade the Australian troops and New Zealand troops were sent up to fight in Turkey because that's where they were needed. And they were concerned, wait a second, we have Germans at our back door. What if they go into Southeast Asia, take that over, then come down and all our troops are up fighting in the Middle East and they come down and take over Australia? That was a concern among some Australians at the time. But it didn't happen. But it could have. And so allying with Japan later on made it a more realistic, in fact, it did happen during World War II. So that was one of the more brilliant ideas that Hitler had. But the Japanese expansion during World War II was not under Hitler. It was, we'll be allied together, but I'm not going to try to control your troops. You aren't going to try to control my troops. So the Pacific theater of World War II, any success there was not due to any brilliant strategy on the part of Hitler. He just made a good choice in an ally for that part of the world. Now, there was a reporter who was assigned to Germany during the space between the war, who actually met Hitler on several occasions and wrote about it. Hitler, he studied mind control, or he was interested in hypnosis, and he studied that. He studied human psychology. So that was part of what allowed him to expand, was just the idea no one's going to question what I'm doing. If I can make up this good excuse and people don't want war anymore, then I can expand and people won't question. People won't try to stop me. That was a part of it. Was that brilliant strategy, or is that just an understanding of human nature? Probably more the latter, except not as much of the latter as you might think. Because again, once the war got started, he just continued on trying the same tactics. So, again, taking over Europe, it was mostly act when no one's expecting it, act quickly, the Blitzkrieg, lightning war. I mean, he's famous for the lightning war, Blitzkrieg, except for the fact that it only was effective during that first year of the war. After that, people were expecting it. And that's why it did work. The whole idea of hit fast, hit when no one expects it, and you can take over a country. Okay, now no one's going to expect me to do it a second time. Now no one's going to expect me to do it a third time. And then by then, everyone's pretty much okay. This is going to happen. It's like, you fooled us twice, or fooled us 3 times, as the case may be. Now people are ready for it, and German expansion didn't continue that much after that. Poland, he took Poland with the aid of Russia, and then in the biggest military mistake in history, some people would say, he turned around and tried to conquer Russia. So that wasn't a brilliant military move. He had other plans with Russia. So the North African campaign, one of his great, brilliant plans there was, look, we're going to punch through Russia, go down through Afghanistan, and that'll force the British to draw their troops out of Northern Africa. This idea came up after several years of trying to punch through Russia had failed. So it was not a brilliant military strategy. It was actually, again, it was back to his old tactics. If we do this hard enough and fast enough, they won't be expecting it and it'll succeed. But of course, he had already been fighting against Russia long enough that they were expecting it. And the idea of punching through was just stupid based on past past Eastern Front problems. Albert Speer was he was an architect. Before the war started, he was one of the chief architects of Germany. Hitler made him in charge of armaments. Served his time in Nuremberg after the Nuremberg trials. While he was in prison, he started writing a book, Inside the Third Reich. Now you got to take this book a little askew. Got to look at it sideways a bit. He admits that he admired Hitler early on, at least. He makes fun of most of Hitler's lead generals, Goering, Goebbels, Himmler, them sorts, as if he always didn't like them, even though, that's, again, he's writing this in prison. The Holocaust, he mentions it for like 1 or 2 pages, in which he sort of emphatically denies knowing anything about it. It's like, bad things were going on, but I didn't know about it. So you got to take his writings with a grain of salt. At one point, he claims that at one point he planned on killing Hitler, just because the war was going bad and he started to see that Hitler was crazy. Again, that supposed assassination attempt, Hitler changed his plans, and so he wasn't where he was going to be. And so Speer was largely writing in the form of, yes, I was a German, but I wasn't as bad as the other Germans. And he's doing this from prison, so you gotta take his writings with a grain of salt, like I said. But the one thing you can sort of take as true, he was in charge of armaments. Hitler liked tanks, he liked fighter planes. Because, again, back to this whole philosophy of hit 'em hard, hit 'em fast. And Speer tried to explain to him, look, bombers will do it for us. Fighter planes are nice. They're needed to escort the bombers, but they don't do enough damage. If you really want to hit them hard, you got to hit them with bombers. But unfortunately, bombers are slow. And so Hitler didn't like bombers because he liked the idea, get these fighter planes, they can go in real fast, they can do their damage, and then get out. But they didn't do a lot of damage. And so Hitler was slow to build bombers, which was, again, another military mistake because he was a one-trick pony, basically. Hit him hard, hit him fast. Some of his tanks were tank designs were fairly poorly done. Supposedly, he had one tank which, when they fired the gun, it flipped over backwards, basically, because he wanted this lightweight tank which could move fast, but he wanted a large gun on it. And large gun with lightweight isn't very stable. So this is the sort of thing you don't hear about it a lot because it was on the drawing board, and then when it got to the testing phase, they realized it was a bad design and they never used it. So it's one of those things you don't hear a lot because it wasn't never really used in the field. It was only tested. But so that's again back to, was he a military genius, or did he just have this one trick which worked well at first and then stopped working well? And my answer is he had one trick that worked well at first and stopped working well. So the question, was he a military genius? No, he wasn't. He got almost he was dependent on people's not wanting to fight. The things he did, quote unquote, right, was he managed to arm Germany while no one else was really arming. Although they did have, that was part of it. The rest of the world did have guns. They still had armaments left over. Their armies weren't completely dismantled. They just didn't want to fight, and so they were putting less effort into their armies, while Germany was building theirs up secretly. Although again, some people say it wasn't necessarily so secret, because there are questions of how much the rest of the world really knew about Germany rearming, and whether they just didn't want to make a big deal over it, or whether they just didn't know about it, is going to be something people can argue back and forth. These are all answers which probably can be, or questions which probably can be answered if you access the right records and speak the right languages, but don't have the resources to do that, so I'm just going to leave it speculative. It could go either way. And so that's about it. The question, there will still be people who say, yes, he was a brilliant tactician because he took over parts of the world. And I'm going to say that was more a result of knowing human nature, that people aren't going to be quick to fight. Which is a part of strategy, but if you're fighting a war, it's a very short-term strategy. You can't fight wars on short-term strategies. So it's not brilliant tactics. That's it. Like I said, this is just something people argue about in high school. For me to go into more detail, I would have to sit down and study a lot more, World War II history. Don't have time to do that because I'm not a professional historian. Just thought I'd share my thoughts on that because it's something get other people thinking about. Because, hey, that's what education's about. Anyway, that's it. Have a nice day.